crown of thorns placed on his head. He knew that he would soon be dead. He said, "Did you forget me, Father, did you?" They nailed him to a wooden cross. Soon all the world would feel the loss of Christ the King before us. Hallelujah, 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 He hung his head and prepared to die, then lifted his face up to the sky, said, "I am coming home now, Father, to you." A reed which held his final sip was gently lifted to his lips. He drank his last and gave his soul to glory. Hallelujah, 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 The soldier who had used his sword to pierce the body of our Lord said, "Truly this was Jesus Christ, our Savior." He looked with fear upon his sword, then turned to face his Christ and Lord, fell to his knees, crying, "Hallelujah, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Took from his head the thorny crown and wrapped him in a linen gown, then laid him down to rest inside the tomb. The holes in his hands, his feet, his side, now in our hearts we know he died to save us from ourselves. Oh, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. 3 days went by, again they came to move the stone, to bless the slain with oil and spice anointing. Hallelujah. But as they went to move the stone, they saw that they were not alone, for Jesus Christ has risen. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
This is all about Good Friday by Wikipedia, the Online Encyclopedia. Good Friday is a Christian holiday commemorating the crucifixion of Jesus and his death at Calvary. It is observed during Holy Week as part of the Paschal Triduum on the Friday preceding Easter Sunday and may coincide with the Jewish observance of Passover. It is also known as Holy Friday, Great Friday, and Black Friday. Members of many Christian denominations, including the Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Lutheran, Anglican, Methodist, Oriental Orthodox, and Reformed traditions, observe Good Friday with fasting and church services. Communicants of the Moravian Church have a Good Friday tradition of cleaning gravestones in Moravian cemeteries. The date of Good Friday varies from one year to the next on both the Gregorian and Julian calendars. Eastern and Western Christianity disagree over the computation of the date of Easter and therefore of Good Friday. Good Friday is a widely instituted legal holiday around the world, including in most Western countries and 12 U.S. states. Some countries, such as Germany, have laws prohibiting certain acts, such as dancing and horse racing, that are seen as profaning the solemn nature of the day. Biblical accounts. In the morning, the whole assembly brought Jesus to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate under charges of subverting the nation, opposing taxes to Caesar, and making himself a king. Luke 23, verse 1 through 2. Pilate authorized the Jewish leader to judge Jesus according to their own law and execute sentencing. However, the Jewish leaders replied that they were not allowed by the Romans to carry out a sentence of death. John chapter 18, verse 31. Pilate questioned Jesus and told the assembly that there was no basis for sentencing. Upon learning that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate referred the case to the ruler of Galilee, King Herod, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. Herod questioned Jesus but received no answer. Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. Pilate told the assembly that neither he nor Herod found Jesus to be guilty. Pilate resolved to have Jesus whipped and released. Luke chapter 23, verse 3 through 16. Under the guidance of the chief priests, the crowd asked for Barabbas, who had been imprisoned for committing murder during an insurrection. Pilate asked what they would have him do with Jesus, and they demanded crucify him. Mark chapter 15, verse 6 through 14. Pilate's wife had seen Jesus in a dream earlier that day, and she forewarned Pilate to have nothing to do with this righteous man. Matthew chapter 27, verse 19. Pilate had Jesus flogged and then brought him out to the crowd to release him. The chief priests informed Pilate of a new charge demanding Jesus be sentenced to death because he claimed to be God's son. This possibility filled Pilate with fear, and he brought Jesus back inside the palace and demanded to know from where he came. John chapter 19, verse 1 through 9. Pilate questioned Jesus and told the assembly that there was no basis for sentencing upon learning that Jesus was from Galilee. Oops. I see. So coming before the crowd one last time, Pilate declared Jesus innocent and washed his own hands in water to show he had no part in this condemnation. Nevertheless, Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified in order to forestall a riot. Matthew chapter 27, verse 24 through 26, and ultimately to keep his job. The sentence written was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus carried his cross to the site of execution, assisted by Simon of Cyrene, called the place of the skull, or Golgotha, in Hebrew and in Latin Calvary. There he was crucified along with two criminals, John chapter 19, verse 17 through 22. Jesus agonized on the cross for 6 hours. During his last 3 hours on the cross, from noon to 3 p.m., darkness fell over the whole land. Jesus spoke from the cross, quoting the Messianic Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? With a loud cry, Jesus gave up his spirit. There was an earthquake, tombs broke open, and the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom. The centurion on guard at the site of crucifixion declared, truly this was God's Son, Matthew chapter 27, verse 45 through 54. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin and a secret follower of Jesus who had not consented to his condemnation, went to Pilate to request the body of Jesus, Luke chapter 23, verse 50 through 52. Another secret follower of Jesus and member of the Sanhedrin named Nicodemus brought about 100-pound weight mixture of spices and helped wrap the body of Jesus, John chapter 19, verse 39 through 40. Pilate asked confirmation from the centurion of whether Jesus was dead, Mark chapter 15, verse 44. The soldier pierced the side of Jesus with a lance, causing blood and water to flow out, John chapter 19, verse 34. And the centurion informed Pilate that Jesus was dead, Mark chapter 15, verse 45. Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus' body, wrapped it in a clean linen shroud, and placed it in his own new tomb that had been carved in the rock, Matthew chapter 27, verse 59 through and 60, in a garden near the site of the crucifixion. Nicodemus, John chapter 3, verse 1, also brought 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes and placed them in the linen with the body, in keeping with Jesus' burial customs, John chapter 19, verse 39 and 40. They rolled a large rock over the entrance of the tomb, Matthew chapter 27, verse 60. Then they returned home and rested because Shabbat had begun at sunset, Luke chapter 23, verse 54 through 56. Matthew chapter 28, verse 1, after the Shabbat at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Important example is after the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said, Matthew chapter 28, verse 6. The readings are John 18, verse 28 through chapter 19, verse 16. Pilate questions Jesus. Jesus is condemned. Jesus is mocked by the Romans. 1. Matthew 27, verse 3 through 32. Judas commits suicide. Jesus is condemned. Jesus mocked by the Romans. Simon of Cyrene compelled to carry the cross. 2. Mark 15, verse 16 through 32. Jesus dies. Matthew chapter 27, verse 33 through 54. Jesus dies. 4. Luke 23, verse 32 through 49. Jesus dies. John 19, verse 25 through 37. Jesus dies. 6. Mark 15, 43 through 47. Joseph of Arimathea buries Christ. 7. John 19, 38 through 42. Joseph of Arimathea buries Christ. And 8. Matthew 27, verse 62 through 66. The Jews set a guard. Catholics. The Good Friday liturgy consists of 3 parts: the liturgy of the Word, the veneration of the cross, and Holy Communion. The liturgy of the Word consists of the clergy and assisting ministers entering a complete silence without any singing. They then silently make a full prostration. This signifies the abasement, that is, the fall, of earthly humans. It also symbolizes the grief and sorrow of the church. Then follows the collect prayer and the reading of chanting of Isaiah 52, verse 13, through Isaiah 53, verse 12, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 through 16, Hebrews 5, verse 7 through 9, and the Passion account from the Gospel of John, traditionally divided between three deacons, yet usually divided between the celebrant, one or two singers or readers, and the congregation which speaks the part of the crowd. In the older form of the Mass, known as the Tridentine Mass, the readings for Good Friday are taken from Exodus chapter 12, verse 1 through 11, and the Gospel according to St. John chapter 18, verse 1 through 40, and chapter 19, verse 1 through 42. Veneration of the Cross. End of services. At the end of the Divine Liturgy, and at some other services as well, it is customary for the faithful to come forward and venerate the blessing cross, hand cross, which is held by the bishop or priest, and to kiss his hand. The practice is also called the veneration of the cross, though it does not involve making prostrations. The cross which is venerated is small, typically 10 to 16 inches. The cross is usually metal, often gold or gold-plated, and can be enameled or decorated with jewels. The figure of Jesus on the cross, the soma, is usually engraved, enameled, or painted on the cross, rather than being a separate three-dimensional figure as is found on a crucifix. This is due to the Orthodox practice of using icons rather than statues in church. Holy Communion. The Eucharist, also called Holy Communion or the Lord's Supper, among other names, is a Christian rite that is considered a sacrament in most churches and as an ordinance in others. According to the New Testament, the rite was instituted by Jesus Christ during the Last Supper, giving his disciples bread and wine during the Passover meal. Jesus commanded his disciples to do this in memory of me, while referring to the bread as my body and the cup of wine as the new covenant in my blood. Through the Eucharist celebration, Christians remember both Christ's sacrifice of himself on the cross and his commission of the apostles at the Last Supper. The elements of the Eucharist, sacramental bread, leavened or unleavened, and sacramental wine or grape juice, are consecrated on an altar or a communion table and consumed thereafter. Communicants, those who consume the elements, may speak of receiving the Eucharist as well as celebrating the Eucharist. Christians generally recognize a special presence of Christ in this rite, though they differ about exactly how, where, and when Christ is present. While all agree that there is no perceptible change in the appearance of the elements, smell, taste, color, weight, fragility, nutritional effects, etc., Roman Catholics believe that their substances actually become the body and blood of Christ, transubstantiation, while the appearance or species of the elements remain. Lutherans believe in the true body and blood of Christ are really present in, with, and under the forms of the bread and wine, sacramental union. Reformed Christians believe in a real spiritual presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Anglican Eucharist theologies universally affirm the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, though Evangelicans believe that this is a spiritual presence, while those of an Anglo-Catholic churchmanship believe this is a corporeal presence. Others, such as the Plymouth Brethren, take the act to be only a symbolic reenactment of the Last Supper and a memorial. In spite of differences among Christians about various aspects of the Eucharist, There is, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, more of a consensus among Christians about the meaning of the Eucharist than would appear from the confessional debates over the sacramental presence, the effects of the Eucharist, and the proper auspices under which it may be celebrated. Communion. Use of the term communion, or Holy Communion, to refer to the Eucharist rite began by some groups originating in the Protestant Reformation. Others, such as the Catholic Church, do not formally use this term for the rite, but instead mean by it the act of partaking of the consecrated elements. They speak of receiving Holy Communion even outside of the rite and of participating in the rite without receiving First Communion. The term communion is derived from Latin communio, that is sharing in common, which translates Greek koinonia in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 16. Stations of the Cross. In addition to the prescribed liturgical service, the Stations of the Cross are often prayed either in the church or outside, and a prayer service may be held from midday to 3 p.m., known as the 3 hours. Agony. In countries such as Malta, Italy, Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Spain, processions with statues representing the Passion of Christ are held. God's laws of man. The commandments of sacrificial laws, also known as ceremonial laws, were as follows. And when it comes time, we will cover that in a little bit, because it is one of the great debates regarding as to what was nailed to the cross. So there's two things to figure out: what was actually nailed to the cross, as far as the laws go, and what was the exact time of his resurrection. And we'll cover that here shortly.
A crown of thorns placed on his head. He knew that he would soon be dead. He said, "Did you forget me, Father, did you?" They nailed him to a wooden cross. Soon all the world would feel the loss of Christ the King before us. Hallelujah. 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 He hung his head and prepared to die, then lifted his face up to the sky, said, "I am coming home now, Father, to you." A reed which held his final sip was gently lifted to his lips. He drank his last and gave his soul to glory. Hallelujah. 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 The soldier who had used his sword to pierce the body of our Lord said, "True He looked with fear upon his sword, then turned to face his Christ and Lord, fell to his knees, crying, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Took from his head the thorny crown and wrapped him in a linen gown, then laid him down to rest inside the tomb. The holes in his hands, his feet, his side. Now in our hearts we know he died to save us from ourselves. Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. 3 days went by, again they came to move the stone, to bless the slain with oil and spice anointing.